Hey guys, good to be back with you. Today is a regular day. I know yesterday was April Fool's. We kind of just did a little fun thing there. But the day before that, I talked to you about the reality or the question of how much control does God have? And we answered it. We figured we recognize as believers God has complete control over things. Today we're going to ask this: how much control does God really exercise? When it comes to what's happening on earth and what's happening with his children, how much control does God really exercise? A couple passages of scripture, they're a little bit longer, but I want you to listen to this. We find this in the book of Job, and often when we ask this question, we turn to this passage because we see a conversation actually in heaven between Satan and God, and it's regarding one of God's children, Job. And this is what happens. Satan looks at God and says, does Job fear God for nothing? Satan replied. Have you not put a hedge around him and his household and everything he has? You have blessed the work of his hands so that his flocks and his herds are spread throughout the land. But now, if you'll stretch out your hand and strike everything he has, he will surely curse you to your face. Well, the Lord said to Satan, very well then. Everything he has is in your power, but on the man himself do not lay a finger. And then Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. And you could see that God had complete control of the situation and put a hedge of protection around Job to the point that in order for something to happen to him, permission had to be sought. There's another verse, real popular verse, probably most of you know it. 1 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 13 says this: no temptation has overtaken you except what is common to mankind. And God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But when you're tempted, he will also provide a way out so that you can endure it. Now, obviously, the writer Paul is saying, hey, here's the reality. There's going to be temptations that happen because of the fallen world that you live in. But God's never going to allow you to be tempted to a point that you can't handle it. God is in that much control. He exercises that much control to make sure that you can never go beyond a point that you wouldn't be able to handle it through his power. The real question, I think, is not how much control does God really exercise. I think the real question is this: how much control do we allow God to exercise in our lives? How much control do we allow him to exercise? Tyler Lockett, he's a wide receiver for the Seattle Seahawks. He had a post on Twitter today that said this: God is bigger than my thoughts. And I thought that's good. That was a good one. But there's a couple ways of looking at that, right? We could look at it and say, God is bigger than my thoughts. And we could say, hey, God is so amazing and so grand and so unbelievable and unimaginable that I would never be able to think enough to understand who he really is. He's that much bigger than my thoughts. And that's a possible meaning that he had. But there's also the other meaning that would say something like this: God is so big that he is able to exercise control over my thoughts. And I think that's a potential reality. God is that big that he could control our thoughts. We recognize oftentimes God just allows us to live through our human life and work through the things that we work through, like was talked about in 1 Corinthians 10 there. But we also know that there are times when we just need God to step in and overcome our thoughts. But the question is, do we let him? Or are there times when we really just want to stay in our thoughts of bitterness or anger, or maybe even stay in some of our impure thoughts that we're having? Do we want God to exercise control over our thoughts? And do we allow God to exercise control? So I guess the answer is this: it's not always how much control does God exercise. It's sometimes how much control do I let God exercise. God could jump in at any time, but he allows me the freedom to be me, and he allows you the freedom to be you. What we want to do is just allow him the freedom to be him in our lives more and more. Think on that today. How can I allow God the freedom to be Him in my life more and more? We'll see you tomorrow.